Driving along the California coast, you might pass through the remnants of a small town. It would be easy to miss this piece of forgotten history, sitting in a gas station parking lot, abandoned and rotting. But in its time, the Orick peanut allowed loggers to cross the frontier into national attention, yet it was forgotten just as fast. The post-World War II housing boom brought logging to all new heights, and rapidly advancing technology allowed for hundreds of thousands of acres of old-growth redwood to be logged in the span of a few decades. By the 1960s, 90% of the redwoods had been raised. It was during this time that the small lumber town of Orick, California thrived, reaching its peak population of almost 3,000 people during the 1950s. The tiny town was home to 5 sawmills, which employed the majority of workers in the area. In July of 1964, surveyors at National Geographic discovered the world's tallest tree in a small grove beside Redwood Creek. This 367.8-foot tall redwood was named Howard Libby, after the head of Arcata Lumber Company, which owned the land. Libby himself was actually on this initial expedition. Many lumber companies at the time were in favor of creating small reserves of unique old growths as a way to win over the public. Arcata Lumber donated the 134-acre grove soon after, and the area was dubbed Tall Trees Grove. As environmental awareness spread during the 60s, the push to create a Redwood National Park grew. A collection of state parks already existed, but they only protected 1/5 of remaining old growths. Up until the 60s, it was common practice to leave forests bordering highways unlogged in order to hide the devastation from tourists. When a handful of companies broke this taboo, these ghastly tableaus helped inspire activism. On October 2, 1968, Redwood National Park first came into being. While this success was celebrated by many, the park had problems. Located along the banks of Redwood Creek around Tall Trees Grove, the 58,000-acre park hugged the curves of the watershed, measuring out at 8.5 miles long and only 1/4 miles wide on either side of the creek. Nicknamed the Worm for its bizarre shape, visitors to the park often could hear the sounds of logging, and devastating clear-cuts in the surrounding area were visible from many spots in the park. Tractors used to tow away felled logs obliterated almost all vegetation and destabilized soil and bedrock, disrupting water flow and causing landslides. Sedimentation in Redwood Creek was reaching dangerously high levels, and multiple scientific studies found that the world's tallest trees were at risk of being washed away by a single heavy rainfall. In 1977, Congressman Philip Burton sponsored a bill that proposed expanding the park by 74,000 acres, more than doubling its size. The backlash from the logging community was immediate. Simpson Timber Company, Louisiana Pacific Corporation, and Arcata Redwood Company ignored pleas to delay logging on the proposed expansion area, instead speeding up their efforts in order to harvest as much as possible before the government could regulate them. When public hearings about the proposed bill were held in the nearby city of Eureka on April 13th, nearly 8,000 people in hard hats and logging uniforms protested against it on the streets. They took their grievances to San Francisco the next day. 100 logging trucks piled high with redwood lumber, making the almost 300-mile-long drive to clog traffic around the Golden Gate Bridge. Those against the expansion argued that wood was a sustainable natural resource, and that it was their right to continue working in the forest the same way they had been for generations. The Humboldt County Board of Supervisors collected statistical data that suggested the expansion would cost the region over 2,000 jobs and would devastate the local economy for years to come. Environmental activists, however, were not dissuaded. The bill continued to move forward, the Carter administration proposing a $350 million budget for adding 47,000 acres. Organizations such as the Save the Redwoods League pointed out that only 10,000 acres of the land would be virgin redwoods, which at the current rate of logging would be gone by the end of the decade, meaning that any job loss was only a matter of time. Park expansion would also have the added benefit of making Tall Trees Grove much more accessible to visitors. The 16-mile hike, which was necessary due to timber companies forbidding access across their land, would be shortened to 6. Meanwhile, the Save Our Jobs Committee, led by Eureka Mayor Sam Sacco, began to plan for a much larger-scale version of the trucker protest. They wanted their cause to cross the frontier into national attention. The goal was to draw the eyes of the Carter administration and rally the working-class people of America behind their cause. But in order to grab national attention, they would need to do something big. A huge section of redwood log was taken from land owned by Louisiana Pacific Corporation. Local sculptor Jack Navarro, with help from Glenn Sherman, hewed the immense chunk of wood into the rough silhouette of an 18,000-pound peanut. This sarcastic sculpture was meant as a jibe against President Jimmy Carter, a former peanut farmer. Before dawn, May 10, 1977, 12 logging trucks would leave Eureka, 13 more trucks joining them along the way, all loaded with various timber items to showcase their way of life. Along with the trucks drove a caravan of families. The crown jewel of the so-called Talk to America convoy was the enormous peanut from Orick, adorned with the boldly printed slogan, "It may be peanuts to you, but it's jobs to us." The peanut was headed to Washington, D.C. to be given to the president as a token of protest. Loggers from as far away as Alaska joined the convoy. Environmental regulations were getting tighter everywhere. The lumber-loaded trucks made their way across the map, giving out redwood seedlings and trying to gain as much local news coverage as possible. William Boak, one of the organizers of the event, claims the convoy almost fell apart halfway across the country. Truckers were having trouble finding stopping places, and families in separate vehicles were lagging behind. Nevertheless, they managed to hold it together. The trucks would arrive in Washington, D.C. on May 24th. There, they would meet an additional 375 protesters who had been chartered over via plane the night before. As they marched up the Capitol steps to listen to a few speeches by supportive politicians, they were greeted by a modest environmentalist protest opposite them on the steps. While the peanut definitely got coverage, it was overwhelmingly negative. News outlets across the country saw the convoy as a waste of gas, money, and redwood saplings, which could not survive in almost all the regions where they were handed out. Local coverage, support from the lumber industry, and the short documentary Enough is Enough, which was funded by the Associated California Loggers, was the full extent of support. The peanut may have helped these people's idea cross the frontier into national attention, but it did not help the reception of that idea. During their time in the Capitol, loggers worked together with the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Jointers to lobby against the bill in the various branches of government. However, when it came time to hand over the peanut, the convoy ran into a problem. On the president's behalf, Assistant Secretary of the Interior Robert Hurst rejected the peanut, saying it was a waste of precious old-growth redwood. Officials at Louisiana Pacific Corporations claimed the peanut was in fact made from a second-growth redwood which was already rotting in the middle. Regardless of its origins, the peanut was not wanted in the capital. Defeated, the convoy turned around and headed back the way they came. When they arrived back in Orick, the peanut was left in a parking lot, with hopes to later create some sort of exhibit to commemorate the event. The Redwood National Park's expansion bill was signed into law on March 27, 1978. Though the Talk to America convoy may have failed in its principal goal, there were some successes for the loggers. Due to increased publicity and lobbying, local Congressman Don H. Clausen was able to add generous programs to compensate affected workers and offer retraining. The final bill also contained $13.4 million for local officials to use as they saw fit to help the economy recover. Most of Humboldt County has done fine in the wake of the lumber industry, but Orick, the peanut's place of origin, is a different story. The economic recovery budget went to an improved marina and airport elsewhere in the county, and the town's population has continued to dwindle. The last permanent restaurant was closed in 2019 after health inspectors found rat urine, cockroach feces, and unapproved insecticides. With a population of under 400, almost a third of whom live in poverty, prospects are not good. Throughout the decades following the park expansion, Orick tried again and again to market itself as a favorable tourist destination. In the 1980s, there were plans to create an informal logging museum spread out across various local businesses to entice visitors to explore. A community planning document from 1985 reads, "The business community in Orick must become enthusiastic salespeople for the beauties and attractions of Redwood National Park, regardless of whether they thought the park should have been created or not." The peanut was proposed as a possible attention grabber that, if nothing else, is unusual enough to make people look and possibly shop. This plan never came to fruition. In the 1990s, locals hoped to brand their town as the gateway to the Redwoods and move the headquarters of Redwood National Parks to the premises. Instead, the population continued to shrink. Orick's final sawmill closed in 2009, and still there were hopes that tourism would be their saving grace. A 2022 interview with Donna Hufford, whose family has lived in the area so long they have a road named after them, shows the unwavering hope that a handful of Orick residents have in their hometown. The president of the Orick Chamber of Commerce, Donna still hopes to be able to make tourism work. She is currently helping to fund a new, more high-end hotel in the area after the town's last motel was closed in 2021 due to health hazards. "Our family has never lost hope that good things will happen here," said Donna. In many ways, the Orick peanut is a microcosm of the North Coast lumber industry as a whole. While it may have been very important and a crosser of many controversial frontiers in its time, it was just as quickly left to rot, along with many of the people and places who put so much labor behind it. The Orick peanut is important to history because it was forgotten, in spite of the fact that the whole reason it was created was to be memorable.